Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Pat Higgins, President and CEO of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. On behalf of the museum and our partners, the Dallas Bar Association and Project Unity, it is my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's program. It's a privilege to work with these two organizations on this important topic. Tonight, we are talking about a subject that affects all of us: how to have civil discourse. In a time that feels so divisive, it is crucial to practice engaging in honest, thoughtful, and respectful dialogue, even or perhaps especially when there's disagreement. The only way we can continue to learn from each other and affect change where it is needed most is to engage in this kind of discourse. If you're familiar with the museum, you may know that we host a series called the Civil Discourse Series. So this topic is near and dear to our hearts, and we look forward to learning from our expert panel tonight. Before I introduce our speakers, I would like to invite Pastor Richie Butler, Senior Pastor at St. Luke Community United Methodist Church and founder of Project Unity, to say a few words.
Thank you, Mary Pat. It's a privilege and pleasure to be with you this evening, to the Holocaust Human Rights Museum and the Dallas Bar Association for partnering with us on this important engagement around dialogue and discourse. Just want to make you aware that Project Unity, this is what we focus on: bridging divides and recognizing that what unites us is greater than what divides us. In particular, our Together We Dine, which we bring people together to have safe, courageous conversations around something most of us don't want to touch, but we know we have to deal with, and that's race. And that can apply in any other setting, and whatever the manner in which, or the conversation that we need to engage in. So we don't know if we have the formula, but we definitely are working to ensure that we can create spaces where people will have civil, healthy dialogue, because we believe that what unites us is greater than what divides us. And we also believe that where there is communication, there is hope. And so we want to provide forums that allow all of us to be part of the hope and the future that we know our community, and most importantly, our children rightfully deserve and need. And so we're leaving this blueprint. So we thank you, Holocaust Human Rights Museum, Dallas Bar Association, for helping us to create a blueprint for our community and for the future of our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Butler. As always, it's such a pleasure to work with you and your team. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly introduce tonight's panelist and our moderator. Leona Allen Ford is Deputy Publisher of the Dallas Morning News. During her nearly 26 years at the News, she has also served as a member of the editorial board, Deputy Managing Editor for Local News, Assistant Managing Editor, Night City Editor, Suburban Editor, and Deputy Metro Editor. She's been involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives her entire career. Robert C. Bordone is an internationally recognized expert in negotiation, conflict resolution, mediation, and facilitation. He is the founder and principal of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute and is currently a senior fellow at Harvard Law School and a senior advisor to the National Institute for Civil Discourse. And Courtney Simmons Elwood served as General Counsel of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency from June 2017 to January 2021. From 2001 to 2007, she held a number of senior positions in the federal government, including Associate Counsel to the President. Elwood is also a senior advisor to the National Institute for Civil Discourse. And our moderator tonight is Brendan Miniter, Vice President and the editorial page editor at the Dallas Morning News. He is also the sole finalist and therefore may soon become the new superintendent and managing director of Great Hearts, Texas, a charter school network here in Texas. Hate to see him leave the Dallas Morning News, but so excited for the school students who are part of Great Hearts, Texas. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end of the program, so please use your Q&A button located at the bottom of the screen and type out and submit your questions, and we'll answer as many of them as possible. I also wanted to mention that for any attorneys watching tonight, the CLE course number will be provided in the chat towards the end of the program, so be watching for that. And now it's my pleasure to turn the evening over to our incredible panel.
Well, thank you so much, Mary Pat, and everyone at the Holocaust Museum and the Dallas Bar Association and Project Unity. Thank you for the opportunity. We're excited here to get started. We have quite a panel, panelists here, the experts on this issue, and I think an issue that's both important and the driving issue of our time. So hopefully we can get to the bottom of some important pieces here. Courtney, I wanted to start with you, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each panelist to tell us a little bit more about your work, because it's hard to sum up, but I do think it'd be helpful for everyone watching to get a better sense of you and your work. So I'm going to do that for each panelist. But Courtney, I'll start with you. Could you give us I guess a little bit deeper of an overview of your CV here and
Sure. I'm happy. First, let me thank you for letting me be part of this great panel. I am really, really excited to be here tonight. And I'm excited because I think this is such an important topic. And I want to commend the Bar Association and the museum and Project Unity for choosing it. And I want to thank Pastor Butler for his work and his leadership. I love the idea of Together We Dine, spending time with, having a meal with, those with whom we may disagree is a crucial step to bridging the gaps that divide us. Just earlier this month, David Brooks, in fact, had a column in the New York Times about this, where he stressed the importance of crossing group lines to have conversations. He says that it takes social courage to do that. And he's right, it does take courage. So thank you all. Those conversations are needed, Brooks and others have explained, to help break down crude stereotypes, to allow us to see individuals and not merely the groups or categories or camps into which we've sorted ourselves. And done well, I truly believe these conversations are an antidote to the all too common tendency to see the world as a group versus group power struggle and a zero-sum game. But let me back up. I think you may be wondering why somebody with my background, the former CIA general counsel, is talking to you about civil discourse. So let me try to answer your question. I spent the last few years inside an agency that is dedicated to understanding foreign threats to our nation's security. There is now a common view among a wide range of experts that polarization in this country has become a national security threat. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, China's Xi Jinping, and other world leaders believe that the United States cannot compete in the 21st century because democracies like ours are too divided. We simply can't get together and act in time. And that's what those autocrats have been saying in recent meetings with our government leaders. Now, it's pretty bold, it's pretty audacious for them to say that, because our adversaries, and in particular, Mr. Putin, and his cyber warriors did, and I'm sure will again, foment that distrust and deepen our divides. They flooded the internet with disinformation and inflammatory posts to exploit our racial and partisan divisions in an effort to undermine social cohesion and stability in the country. But our adversaries, they were exacerbating divisions that already existed. The problem was there, they just made it worse. And it is true that today our polarization is impeding the collective action we need to address the problems and dangers that we face. So I look at these issues through a national security lens, and I also see them as a lawyer. And I believe that lawyers have an opportunity, perhaps even a duty, to rebuild our civic health. Why? Because of our training, and also because of our commitment to the rule of law and to the Constitution. One historian has explained that the Constitutional Convention in 1787 was really about just one thing. How can people govern themselves, genuinely govern themselves, in a way where they're going to treat each other well? It sounds like a simple question, but we all know it's a very difficult answer. How do we set aside our self-interest, our passion and prejudice, and act instead on the basis of reason and justice and the common good? And as many of you know, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of this same great challenge again and again. In Oslo in 1964, he spoke of a story plot. And in this story, and I'm going to quote him here, you had a widely separated family that inherits a house in which we have to live together. A family unduly separated in ideas, culture, and interests who, because we can never again live without each other, must learn somehow to live with each other. And Dr. King returned to that image in his final book, aptly entitled, I think, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or community? And those are really big questions relevant today as they were 50 or 250 years ago. If you want to live in a democracy that is full of diversity, as I do, we have to work together on the answers. And I'd submit, and we can dig into this later, that this will require a mindset of humility and tolerance, and compromise, and a dedication to justice and reason, and a certain level of trust. And to get there, we must start. It all starts with a commitment to communicating in a way that is both civil and authentic. That's the only way forward. And it's frankly the only way to get to where you personally may want to go. Because no one will change in ways you want them to until they believe that you understand and accept them for who they are right now. And that's the paradox described by a journalist named Amanda Ripley in her recent work on conflict. And it's true regardless of what kind of conflict you're in: family conflict, workplace conflict, national politics, or global affairs. So this is the approach that research says is more likely to be successful and lasting. It requires debate and reflection and compromise and thinking about the greater good. And it all begins with civil discourse. So again, my thanks to our hosts for choosing this topic. And thanks to each of you for your interest. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Courtney. Bob, I'm going to turn to you, give you the same opportunity here. Tell us a little bit about yourself, but also your approach to this social problem as we go forward.
Thank you, Brendan, and thanks also to the Dallas Bar Association, the Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and Project Unity. This is a topic that has really occupied a lot of my time and energy over the past few years. So I am always delighted when others want to engage it, want to listen about it, want to learn about it. And I always learn from these conversations as well. So it's a real honor to be here. So I want to kind of share my entry into this work by way of saying a little bit more about myself. So I spent 21 years on the full-time faculty at Harvard Law School, where I primarily taught negotiation, conflict resolution, mediation, and facilitation. And during that time, and I would say particularly in the last few years of my full-time teaching there, I started to notice a discernible shift in the way law students were engaging across lines of political difference. And specifically, what I started to notice was an increased, and I would say studied avoidance, a decision not to engage across those lines of difference. So what was often we were left with in a classroom was what I would term a broadly left of center dominant viewpoint, with faculty often charged with playing a straw man for either conservative viewpoints or more far left arguments. At the same time, I was very aware of the fact that students of various stripes across the political spectrum actually did exist at this school. And that's because in private conversations, these opinions would emerge. But the conversations were not occurring across lines of difference, only within those lines. At the same time that I'm doing this kind of work at Harvard Law School, in 2011, I started working with an organization called Seeds of Peace. So some of you may be familiar with this organization. For those who are not, it's an organization that does all sorts of dialogue and leadership work. But I think perhaps what they're best known for is bringing young Israeli and Palestinian leaders to a multi-week summer camp in Maine each summer. And at this camp, these Israeli and Palestinian young leaders engage every single day in 3 hours of intense dialogue. And then in the afternoon, they have kind of regular summer camp. And what I noticed was that while I saw this kind of reduction in conversation across political difference amongst some of our most talented and elite leaders in the United States, these Israeli and Palestinian leaders would go kind of fully into the fray and engage really, really hard conversations that for them were really at an existential level. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the Israeli and Palestinians were incredibly skillful at this. They often weren't. It was messy, lots of tears, sometimes people running out of the room, but they were doing it. They were at least engaging this. And so what I want to talk about and what my work really turned to was something that I really think is actually prerequisite to conversation and dialogue. And that is something that in my writing and my teaching now and training now, I've come to term conflict resilience. And what conflict resilience is the ability to sit with and be fully present around those with whom we have fundamentally different viewpoints, those that cut to the core, and then to listen to the other side with a full and generous heart, but also to express our own viewpoint with authenticity and with grace, and in a way that maximizes the likelihood that the other side can hear us. And I think conflict resilience is something we see in serious decline in the US. And I think there are many, many reasons why. I think one relates to just the role of social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We can curate these communities of like-mindedness and escape really easily. We also have a severely segmented news media, Fox, MSNBC, CNN. In the university context, at the least bit of discomfort, people will often try to escape, whether it's around trigger warnings or just saying they feel uncomfortable. I'm on a dispute resolution listserv with a bunch of negotiation professors, and a conversation that came up in the last week was this tendency of students to avoid conflict, which is kind of interesting. And then another reason why I think we are in a bit of trouble is we don't really have models for really good hard dialogue. To the degree we see people engaging conflict, it's often at the level of a pitched battle. And then lastly, I would say we've created an environment where the cost of speaking and engaging can often be perceived as incredibly high. Because if you say something that lands the wrong way or gets misheard, it could really be a career-ending or career-limiting move. So I think what we really need to work on is increasing our own ability to be conflict resilient, our willingness to be uncomfortable, our willingness to end conversations that don't have a bow on it at the end, our willingness to extend a bit of generosity to the other and engage in some perspective taking. And I would say, and this is what I'll end on, right, an understanding that civil discourse is really quite different from debate. Debates are set up to have winners and losers, but discourse isn't that. Discourse is a lot more like the negotiation that I always teach, which is that there's a mutual gain possibility. There's a learning and personal growth possibility. And there's a possibility of seeing the other in more human terms. So I'll end there. I'm looking forward to more conversation with all of you and really grateful to be here tonight.
Well, great. Leona, we heard Courtney mention, go all the way back to the Constitutional Convention and, what kind of government would we have? Could we govern ourselves, and whether a democracy could handle a complex problems of the world, and noted that the other places in the world, other governments are saying, hey, maybe not in terms of the United States. We heard Bob just say, hey, we might be getting worse at conflict resilience here. But I think a lot of people don't think about in terms of the media, or at least what a newspaper like Dallas Morning News plays, is it's very much in a conversation with the community which it serves. And so with that, I want to give you the same opportunity here, talk a little bit about your work and how you're thinking about and approaching this problem, because you and I have talked about hard conversations a lot, and how do we help guide people through them. So the floor is yours.
Absolutely. I'm a deputy publisher for the last 18 months, but I've been at the Dallas Morning News 26 years, in this business about 38 years. So we are in the crosshairs in the media. We are really in the hot seat to this very issue. And that's why I'm really excited about the panel and to hear the discussion today. My job is I am in charge of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives at the Dallas Morning News now. And what that means is that really at the core of what I do is trying to celebrate the differences that we all have and bring the different perspectives to the table so that we can be a better community, so that we can be a better company and have more success, because we have innovation and we have different perspectives at the table. I have gone to Together We Dine. Last year, I was at a table with just a fascinating group of folks who I had not met before, had not talked to before. I'm from Dallas, and these were people who I met through the program. We sat down at a meal together. We talked about our backgrounds together, which were very, very different. But the one thing that was fascinating is that we had a lot of things in common. We wanted good schools. We wanted, good neighborhoods for our kids. We all wanted to live in, safe homes and safe neighborhoods. We had a lot more in common than we had different. And so part of what the core of what we do at our company is trying to lay out the facts, trying to really have people understand and consider all the sides so that they can come to their own conclusions about things. Part of my work at the Morning News was on the editorial board, and in that job, that's where Brendan and I talked the most, it was our responsibility to try to help people navigate all the different things that were being said, all the different things that were being brought to the table, and then try to have a conversation. We encouraged people to have a conversation because there was typically many more sides than two to every issue. And I think we are not going to really make progress until we start listening for understanding instead of listening to respond. And I think that's just the core of this business every day, is really trying to get people to understand where the other people are coming from. And I think programs like Together We Dine really help that. It's really the core of what we do at the newspaper every day. So I'm really excited to get started.
Awesome. Courtney, I want to turn to you. You mentioned a couple of things that I think I quickly want to just drill down on to make sure people caught and understand the depth I think that you're getting to there. You mentioned humility, compromise, and trust. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about humility and how do you actually build these things? Because I think, do we have enough civic education in this country? Do we need to be thinking about that? What are tools that we can be thinking about to help people? When I think of social media, humility is not the word that comes to mind, and that the culture that we're forming is not very humble. So could you tell us a little bit more what you meant there?
Sure. First, let me second your sort of suggestion that there needs to be a lot more civic education. And by civic education, I don't mean just the what, how does a bill become a law? What are our three branches of government? Civic education requires an education in certain skills and dispositions. And among those dispositions is humility. And by humility, I mean here, we all have the tendency to sometimes fall into the trap that because I think it has to be right. And by humility, I mean a recognition that it is not simply possible that we are wrong in our perceptions. We are almost certainly wrong. As one of my favorite commentators likes to say, we see through a glass darkly. We are almost certainly missing or misconstruing some critical part. The dog is barking back there. We therefore must be willing to entertain new information and be open to changing our opinions. So that's what I mean by humility in this case.
Fair enough. Leo, I want to turn a little bit back to you here, and to just think about how do we engage. One of the things that we've talked about a lot is that there were lingering social problems out there, that may social ills that may not have been addressed, that have not have been addressed. I shouldn't say may not have been addressed. And is part of the piece here that's driving this conversation, and people are saying, look, we've waited a long time. I need to be heard here. How do we make sure we pull some of that out into the light to make sure that say, okay, we hear that, we'll address that, and work some of that stuff? Because I think often that's part of the logjam that needs to be broken.
Well, I think it's twofold, Brendan. For one, we have to make the environment safe enough to have that conversation. And that's safe on both sides, safe on the person who's asking questions and exploring, and then safe on the person who might have that information to share it. Too often, I think we are afraid to, as Bob said, if you say something, afraid you're going to get so criticized for it that you don't say anything at all. And that leads to not having good understanding. And so I think what we have been doing here at our company, much of the work I've been doing, is making safe environments to have that dialogue. It's okay to ask a question, and it's okay to answer the question from your perspective. And I just think that if we don't somehow allow people to some grace, and we all said that word in our conversations, is allowing people some grace to get to the understanding. We're so fast to tell people they're wrong or they're right that we are not listening enough to understand where they're coming from. And it requires some grace and some humility, and to some knowledge that maybe you aren't right, that maybe there are some things that you didn't know that you can learn from somebody else. And much of the work that the conversations we've been doing here is about that.
Yeah. Bob, I want to turn to you, and Courtney had mentioned social courage, and you had mentioned conflict resilience, and I think those might be terms that people can figure out what they mean, but might not be necessarily familiar to it. And I want to ask you, in preparation for this, I started looking into even the scholarship around courage, and where does courage come from? And I think people they think it just, hey, if you're a courageous person, you do it. But it turns out it's like everything else. You can learn it, and you sort of walk up a ladder on it. And if you make little things that turn out okay, then you're willing to make bigger and bigger decisions. Is that part of would something like that be part of the piece of how you can build, the conflict resilience you're talking about? That, hey, I had this one conversation with this, and this is why the program that you mentioned in Maine was so enticing to me, because those folks are going to go home, they're going to go back to the Middle East, and they're going to say, you know what, I've met a Palestinian, I got to know them over the summer, I met an Israeli, we were at summer camp together. Everything I'm now hearing in sort of the propaganda might not be exactly true, and help walk up that courage ladder. Is that one way to think about it, or how else would you suggest we think about sort of building that muscle to be resilient to the conflict that we have to engage in?
Yeah, no, thanks for your question, Brendan. And I think the answer is yes. Conflict resilience is in part a stance that one has, and it is in part a set of skills. And in both cases, they are developed, as in most skills and most stances, from some degree of practice and failure, right? But also practice. So I think one of the really unhelpful, assumptions that many people have is that if you're in a situation of conflict, that is bad. And therefore, if possible, it should be avoided. And if not, you should then try to vanquish the other side as quickly as you can. And I think that's just actually not, I mean, it's inconsistent with scholarship and it's inconsistent with life. Once you go beyond one person into 2, 3, 4, people have differences. And when people have differences, there will be conflict. And so conflict is actually, when handled well, a source of vibrancy, creativity, learning. But we have to get, but there's some uncomfortable pieces to it. And so what I would say, Brendan, is partially it's practicing. I would also, though, agree with what Leona says. Partially, it's important for us to create some containers that make it easier or safer or lower the risk to practice. There's a phrase, after you were done speaking, Leona, before Brendan asked the question, I was gonna say there's this phrase that facilitators at Seeds of Peace use, which I love, and it's called permission to be raggedy. And it is this idea that in a moment when there's something that is on my mind or heart, I'm not totally sure how I could say it eloquently, and I'm a little bit worried that maybe you might take it the wrong way. I just say, can I have some permission to be raggedy? And the rest of the group extends some grace to you, which, by the way, doesn't mean that they don't get angry.
Right.
But it does mean they're not going to put you into kind of permanent bad person land, or and I think we need to create some spaces where people have some permission to be raggedy. And then the more you practice and realize, like, okay, like that was uncomfortable, that was hard, but I'm still alive. The people are still talking to me. And oh, I learned something. Then I think people will do this more.
I love it. I mean, one thing that I often try to throw into a conversation is I reserve the right to be wrong out loud, and sometimes that can help break the ice. Is okay if he thinks he can be wrong, then I can be wrong too, and we can be wrong together. We can figure it out, kind of thought. But that sort of takes down that wall and builds that level of trust.
This is tough stuff. This is really, really hard stuff. It's hard to talk about your personal feelings. It's hard to talk about some things that you experience that others might not have experienced. It's hard to really be emotionally vulnerable in the workplace, at home, at your church. And we have got to be thinking through. Part of where we started this journey, our doubling down on trying to create an environment of inclusion and belonging, is we had the conversations. We had a facilitator in and said, hey, what are some of the questions you want to know? Hey, let's just talk about what those fault lines are. Because if we didn't start there, it's going to continue to be hard. So if you can just open the door a crack to, I'm just thinking about something, call me an idiot for asking the question, but I just need to ask this question. So I have made it safe for anybody to ask me anything. Okay, you can come ask me anything that you have a question. I might tell you, hey, that offends me, or maybe you should have asked it this way, but you're going to get an answer, because that's what opens the door to the dialogue. So it's tough stuff, and you have to make sure everybody understands. You have to extend some folks some grace and allow them to really go there with you.
Yeah. Courtney, I was really taken by something you'd said in the beginning there. You said that you're now seeing disunity in this country we should be thinking about as a national security problem. And you mentioned Putin and that sort of thing, trying to say, hey, see that the democracy model doesn't work, my model is better. But I took it you meant something even larger than that, not just the geopolitics of it, but that internally, if we don't get this right, the old line of that we're only one generation away from losing a free society. And sometimes that line feels a little overwrought, but right now, just how divided we are. We've been this divided. This isn't the most divided period we've had. We had obviously a very brutal civil war and that sort of thing, but we're pretty divided on that. And so I wonder if you couldn't drill down a little bit more on just how you are thinking about that, and particularly that I'm going to get back to that word trust that you'd mentioned. I think civic trust has been, every metric of that has been going down for forever. I'm just thinking of the book Bowling Alone that really sort of helped bring that to the consciousness to a lot of folks. But how do we think about trust, and how important is civic trust to even just the maintenance of a free society and our civil institutions that we require to be successful here?
Right. Yeah. No. And you're mentioning trust. Maybe I was just about to say that you have to have some level of trust with the individuals before you begin these conversations. And I, it's clear that you and Leona have this great relationship because you worked next door to each other for a long period of time. And you probably didn't start your conversations with the most difficult topics. You probably started about kids and, who likes cars and what type of pet you have and does your dog bark at bad times. You have to see people as more than their binary nature, not just black, white, Republican, Democrat, see them as oboe players and car enthusiasts. And they become, once you see them outside the binary, you can help start building the trust we have to build more trusted relationships. And those occur in schools, colleges, universities, and then the workplace. And from that, then you can begin to have the difficult conversations. And I think you were also referring in your question to sort of trust with the government, right? Do we trust the institutions of government? And I do think we're sort of at an all-time low for trusting government at the moment. And that has to be restored. But I do think it's a very real question of whether or not our government institutions are a reflection of the people, right? And so I personally think the most progress can be made is through the people. And you referred to when we have been as equally polarized in history. And you mentioned Robert Putnam. Well, he wrote another book called Upswing. And in it, he talks about the Gilded Age, and he describes all the factors in which we're as polarized, as dysfunctional in the Gilded Age, its greatest economic disparity and the like during that period. And he really attributes to the recovery from that and the country coming together was not, our President Roosevelt or others in the progressive era, but the people across the country doing things in their communities to move us forward and build the unity at a very local level and move progress forward. And then that was reflected in the government leaders. And I tend to agree with that. I do think that the onus sits on all of us as citizens to look for change where we can.
I think that's a really big, important point. First off, yes, I think one of the early conversations that Leona I had did involve the fact that I have this crazy dog. And she said, one of the things I know about you is you got this crazy dog, and I'm living in fear that he's going to bark here any minute. But Bob, I do want to turn to you to pick up on that a little bit, because I think one thing that we often forget, is that this country is so much larger than our government, right? We're like, oh, this is what Congress should be doing. This is what the president should be doing. But I'm taken by the comment you had to start in this, and I'm sorry, maybe you can pick up on this a little bit more, but the fact that your law students didn't want to talk to each other if they disagreed with each other. So they would talk in their own camps, but they wouldn't talk. In law school, I just think of the Socratic method, and you're willing to walk through any of the toughest legal issues out there. And if you're not willing to do it there, you'll never do it. It sort of disturbs me that the students are just organically separating even at that level. And so, I think, Courtney's point that each our individual actions can be, the old line that the sum of great many number of small things is never small. But is that what you're seeing as well in your work, that there's just this larger, narrative going on, and people are making good choices and bad choices at the same time, and heading in the wrong direction? Is that a place we should be thinking about of organically on an individual level, finding ways to build these bridges?
I mean, I do think that the individual level is really critically important. And I think we face some real challenges. I actually think that many people, law students, actually want to engage the other side, but a few things are going on, right? One is, I do think culturally, we are in a moment where people don't not like anyone ever liked discomfort or pain. but I think our pain threshold generally is lower across the board, and the cost of escape is so low. It's so easy, right? So that's one problem. I think another problem is that there are very high costs potentially of engagement that we used to not have. And that's why I think this idea of creating more intentional containers is important. But I think a third thing that we haven't raised, and this is one that I really struggle with, is I think there's a lot of people who would find a conversation like this really edifying and encouraging. And they're looking for projects like Project Unity. They're looking to sit down and have those conversations. But there is another set of people that don't see the point. And depending on where they sit politically, there are different reasons why. I think there's a set of people who say, the time for listening and conversation is over. If I engage in a conversation, I legitimate a system that's fundamentally corrupt. I'm not going to do it. I think there are others, right, who are absorbed in a social media, news media world that paints things in black and white, good or bad terms that lack the kind of nuance and complexity that most issues actually deserve, and also that are most people. Most people are not cartoon characters, but I think that I'm really perplexed. I'm really interested in, how do we get those people into these kinds of conversations? How do we persuade them that this is worthwhile, that the costs aren't so high and the gains are very worthy? And I think part of that does go to what Courtney says around the importance of civic education. But I think that there's a lot of other factors going on that I would love to hear anyone's thoughts on, but I think are really important.
Bob, it's interesting though that even folks who are so far apart ideology wise and political wise, once they start talking about their kids on the soccer field, once they start talking about, man, that teacher in English, once they start talking about their kids on a sports team, I think that's where it has to start. It has to start with what we have in common, and then try to make sure that everybody is not so, somebody mentioned social media. People are on social media to see who agrees with them. Your friends are the ones who agree with you, not the ones who are you're not there for discourse. You're there to see who agrees with your point of view. But that's why we're in the information business at our company. We're trying to just we have a voter's guide for that reason, get all the information you can get on a candidate and then make your own decision. But too often folks are not they're not looking for discernment. They're looking for agreement on their points of view. And so for me, it has been trying to look for those common things that matter to many people. You're not going to change. We've decided we're not going to change people's minds on some really big issues, but what we can do is help them understand, at least give them the information where you're at least stopping a moment to think as to whether your side has some kind of, there may be something you can learn from somebody else.
Yeah, I wonder, and this is a question for anyone on the panel who wants to answer it. I think we're at a place where we're not even agreeing on basic facts and in that sort of thing. And we're in some would feel like existential issues. Whether it's the vaccine debate and election integrity election and that sort of thing. How do you, I guess the way I think about it is one way to engage in a conversation with folks on this is to give them a little bit of room. Don't just put out a moral position that if they don't agree with you, that they're going to be in an immoral spot. But how do you work with folks that when you say, look, we're not even talking the same language because we don't even agree that the basic facts. How do you go down that conversation? How do you get going on what we're talking about doing here if you're starting from that position where you can't even agree on the basics?
I would say that you have to start listening, with genuine curiosity, right? I think Leona said if you're just waiting long enough so that you can get your point in there, it's not going to progress, right? But even if there's somebody that you totally disagree with, I think you can bring an element of curiosity to the conversation, really like peel it back and ask those questions. Well, tell me more, ask me, tell me why you think that. But you have to be sincere, because if people feel that you're trying to understand them, even if you fail, they will open up and they'll start telling you more, and you will find something with which you can move forward. And only when you have them open and willing to talk, can you challenge maybe some of these assumptions, some things that, may in your mind be complete disinformation or misinformation or just plain wrong. But you cannot even begin to have that conversation until you have brought genuine curiosity and listening. In other words, do not listen like the trial lawyers that are on the audience, right? So I was a litigator my life, and all we do is we listen intently so that we can see the weakness in an argument and we pass, right? And that is not the kind of listening we're talking about. We're talking about the kind of listening that Bob teaches in his classes on mediation. So let me hand it over to Bob.
I mean, I completely agree with you, Courtney, that this is what we really need. It has to start with listening, and it has to start with curiosity. And that means a lot of patience and a lot of discipline, because most people actually aren't crazy. And if you're listening to somebody and you think what they're saying is crazy, you don't know their story. And so, I mean, I think that's where that reporter's instinct actually comes in, right? Like, I need to understand their story.
That's interesting, Bob, that you say that. It's help me understand. That was like the most effective question I've ever asked in my career. Is I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this sounds nuts, but help me understand what you're trying to convey here. And for the hard part, of course, is that there are some humanity things that right is just right. Okay. That crimes against humanity, there's just some things that are, for me, not negotiable in conversations about life and limb. But most everything else is pretty open. And so I have started in just trying to train myself and folks who I talk to ask that question. Just help me understand where you're coming from. And that leads to a really rich conversation.
And I totally agree with that. One thing I think that comes up for people is, well, this sounds exhausting. I'm really busy. Like, it'd be wonderful if I could get Uncle Rocco to, but I don't have the time or the energy or the reservoir in me. And so what I would say to that is, yes, that makes sense. And I don't think we need to be doing it all the time with everybody in every moment. And I think as citizens that there is some obligation as part of being a member of a representative democracy to, on occasion, put in this effort and this energy, especially with, as you were saying, Leona, people in our community, people that we are around the soccer field with, or that are in our family, or that we have to coordinate with, at work. Like, not all the time, not every moment. It is tiring. It requires training. It requires intention. It requires discipline. And maybe we should try.
And what are the costs if we don't put the effort in? Courtney described something that's frightening to me. A world in which we don't have democracy. That's frightening to me. So yeah, it's a lot of work. It is, I go home exhausted many days. But
Right.
what happens if you don't put in the effort? And that's
Yeah.
what kind of drives me.
Right. And I mean, as Winston Churchill famously said, and others have said it too, right? The democracy is just a mess. Like it's hard, it's difficult, but it's better than the alternatives, right? So it is a difficult thing to do. And it does I think there's this perception, and I know that I sometimes feel like doing this, like, oh, I'll just vote, and then I've done my civic duty, right? I'm done. It's their problem. They can figure it out. But we really do all share the responsibility. And it is a, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And therefore, we all share the responsibility, and we can't just sort of check the box in the voting booth and think we've discharged the responsibility.
I think that's exactly right. I have a couple of quick questions I want to ask, and then we're going to turn to some audience questions here. But Leona, one thing that you and I have talked about is that there's a risk if we don't get this right, people start to disengage. And I think that's a real threat and a real problem. It's one piece that we haven't, I think, really touched on here, that if people really do separate and just don't even go, even start the beginning of this process, we'll never bring them back because they're disengaged. How do we, one, do we need to be worried about that? And two, how do we think about that? And how do we reel some of those folks back to make sure that remain engaged?
Yeah, I think it's a big risk. I think that, Bob talked about it in his classrooms, that if people aren't trying to learn from each other, about their backgrounds, I just don't want to live in that neighborhood. I don't want to live in a world where nobody wants to engage with anyone else, and no one wants to know, seek facts. No one wants to do any research. Nobody wants to come to their own conclusions. To me, that is a world where we're all in silos. And I don't think that's realistic either. So, I think we have to, as we've all said, it's an effort you have to put in. If we don't continue to have people at least trying to hear the other side, we're all in silos. We're in some country I don't think I want to be in.
Well, it sounds like if you have put yourself in that silo and you've decided to disengage, the message to you is, hey, by the way, we need you here to help us build the society. You'll never get what you want if you stay in your own silo. Courtney, I wanted to, before I turn to the first audience question here, I wanted to ask, you had said at the beginning of this that as lawyers, there's a special responsibility to that. I think people often think of lawyers, you mentioned, litigators, but often, lawyers are also trying to say, well, what is the just outcome here? How does this case get resolved that actually serves justice and serves the interests of my client? And often you got to say, it serves the interest of the other client so we can actually get a deal, right? And so can you help us just think through a little bit what you meant by lawyers have a special responsibility here? They obviously have a lot of voice in some of these debates. So.
Sure. Yeah, no, I do think, and then just to echo Leona's point, that there are moments in which, it is not there, compromise or tolerance is not an option, right? We do live in an adversarial legal system, right? And lawyers do battle it out sometimes. And there's winners and losers. And there are times when fighting using every legal tool that's available is the right course of action, right? But not always, right? There's this other approach, and lawyers, do receive some, or I hope, training in mediation, the kind of training that Bob gives his students at Harvard Law School. And there's the transactional lawyers out there and the mediators who are trained to, listen, like, business lawyers, deal lawyers. There is a way to bring both sides together, and you have to in order to get the deal done, right? And so those lawyers are the ones that probably have the skills to do this kind of work. But I would encourage all the lawyers that might be on the call to if you didn't take mediation in law school, and I didn't, I don't even know if it was offered, to take it now and develop those skills, because I promise you, I'll bet that would help you not only in your professional life, It'll help you in your personal life. Because, and then I'll turn it back over to Bob, who teaches these courses. You know, the point about people feeling excluded or ostracized, that is an incredibly dangerous force, right? It's not only the world I don't want to live in. You know, I want to live in a community of diverse views where people feel they can come together. But if people feel excluded and rejected, the research shows that they'll turn aggressive and violent. And so it goes beyond just wanting to have a community of diverse views. It is really critical that if we're going to have a healthy community, that no one feels that they've been ostracized or rejected or excluded.
I think that's totally right, Courtney. And I think part of this, right, is there is a shift for lawyers. You know, one of the things that I've been encouraged by is a number of law firms that have actually brought me in to do trainings on difficult conversations. And we were talking earlier about humility or grace, and a big piece of a difficult conversation that I think can sometimes be hard for lawyers, right? But is moving from a stance of certainty that I've done my homework, I'm thorough, I'm fact-based, to a stance of curiosity, which is hard to do. And it's particularly hard to do around the issues that we feel most strongly about. I think the other really tough shift, but I think is important, is lawyers sometimes are taught to be, for good reason, to be analytic and reason and based. And yet so many of these really hard issues, which of course are grounded in information and events, but also are loaded with a lot of emotion, a lot of meaning and history and identity. And so finding language around that, making space to be able to share those emotions, that sometimes is not as easy for lawyers to do, but I think is really important as well.
Yeah. Let me turn to an audience question here. The person asks, you know, we tend to stake a lot of our personal identities on a position. So when someone says, hey, that position is wrong, a reaction to it can be very visceral and sort of, it's touching you personally. It's not where you are on a policy issue. So it's no longer a dialogue about a policy. It's a dialogue on whether you value that person. How do you get past that? How do you break through that barrier and just to be able to engage in this difficult conversation if you're bringing so much to that, or if the other person's going to bring so much of that to their, from their personal perspective, that you're not debating policy anymore, you're debating who they are?
Brendan, I'll say, just put another plug in for Together We Dine. That whole event, you know, the way it works is that we all showed up at the Holocaust Museum, and then you were assigned dinner guest with people at homes or, you know, restaurants around town of people you don't know at all. And so you have to spend a good bit of time at the dinner, even learning, well, who am I dining with, you know, and that forces you to be outside of your own identity. It forces you to ask some questions and forces you to learn about somebody else. It really is striking how you lose your own, you know, this is me, and this is what I'm here to talk about. And the reason I'm coming is because I have this in my background and this identity, to really just having a meal. You know, you're breaking bread with somebody. It requires you, again, just to try to put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And I think much of the conversation we've had for the last 20 months or so, it's about that. Please walk in my shoes for a minute. And I think that's what that event does for people.
And Brenda, can I say something about your question? Because I think it's a really critical one, right? This is something that comes up in a lot of the training work. When someone says, you know, Bob, you're wrong, that is an attribution being made toward you. And of course it hits an identity trigger, because we think, no, I'm someone who is thorough and careful, so I'm not wrong. I think the challenge, right, is if you're the receiver of that, is to see that as a marker for a strong set of not just views, but also emotions, right? So there's almost a jujitsu here, right? The temptation is to be like and say, no, I'm right. But instead to realize that wasn't really about me. There's a set of views and feelings there. And what I want to do is turn that and say, wow, gosh, we see it differently. Tell me more about why that's wrong. That is a hard thing to do, but that is the thing that opens up the learning space. Maybe when we hear them, we double think they're wrong. Or maybe we come away thinking, I still think they're wrong, but that's a really different, interesting story. It's not what I expected. Even if we don't think that, we learn more about what's persuasive to them. And often that's like not the thing that's persuasive to us. So continuing to say what would have been persuasive to us is wasted breath.
Yeah, but you just think of, the old congressional rules for debate, right? You don't say so-and-so, is wrong, or so-and-so, you say that the right honorable speaker kind of, in all that stuff sounds very formulaic and formal and all that, but there's a reason for that. I think that you're getting at that, right? It depersonalizes it and say, I'm now talking about policy, not about this person in particular. And I hear what you're saying too, is also, if you are bringing a lot of emotion to it, maybe you should take a page out of Leona's book, which is, help me understand this. All of a sudden, that's Courtney's piece of being humble. He brings a little bit of humility to it, but you're also putting your own emotions inside and saying, I'm going to walk in your shoes here. Help, put me in your shoes. Let me walk you, help me walk there a little bit. It seems like that's what you're saying is you can do that. You can take your own emotions out and then walk with that person who's having their own, who might be bringing emotions to the discussion. Yeah. Another question from the audience is do you think it would be helpful for major media outlets to focus on including quotes from people that say, look, this is a really complex issue, versus just the red blue quotes that maybe, hey, we got both sides of the story kind of view to it. Do we think that would be helpful in this conversation if that was getting into more media accounts?
I think so, Brendan. I think part of what we are teaching our trying to foster with our journalists is there aren't just two sides. There's a whole bunch of sides. There's much of our editorial work has been, there is a gray middle, that there isn't for most important issues, there isn't just two sides. There's something somewhere in the middle, and trying to get to that kind of nuance is hard to do because no one wants to think about the nuance. They just want to go to the two sides of the two camps. But if we're doing our jobs in the media, that's what we're doing. Hey, there were two sides and there's a middle, and then there was one side over here. It's all four corners, not just two sides. And it's really the core of our responsibility as media. So to answer your question, absolutely.
Yeah. I'll turn to another question from the audience, which is, it seems to me that so much of this is rooted in how we are now raising our children. Should we be giving kids strong, real values instead of programming them for quote unquote success, rather than putting the kid in a percentile, figure out what is their specific gift? I would add, so, is it something to do with how we're raising our children? I guess I would add to that question a little bit to say, is this really also generational?
I don't know if it's generational. I mean, there's been a lot of interesting work done recently by a group called Educating for American Democracy. It brought 300 scholars and academics together from all over the spectrum on these issues. And they put out a report and then a framework for teaching civics and history. And in that report, they explain that the United States during the Cold War, during Sputnik, got really concerned that we were falling behind in science and math. And so tons of money went into science and math. And you know what? Our students became better at science and math, but something has to fall out of the curriculum, right? So civics fell out of the curriculum. And as we talked about earlier, civics is more than just, the schoolhouse rock and how a bill becomes a law. It is developing these virtues. Our founders talked about the importance of public virtues, not private virtues that you might get at church, but public virtues, setting aside your self-interest and your passions and your prejudice for the common good, and things like tolerance and humility and compromise and moderation. And when I mentioned these to my teenager, I was talking to her about talking to you guys tonight. And I was like, these are the virtues we need to do better. I didn't do great. She's like, oh, we covered that in kindergarten. And that was it, right? That was it. We did it in kindergarten, and then we didn't need to do it anymore. And that's not enough, right? These are the skills, the dispositions, the habits that need to be reinforced over and over and over again, as well as the knowledge part of how our government works.
Yeah, no,
And I would agree with that, and also add that another thing that I think should be done in elementary education is actually training on how to handle conflict, which not only doesn't happen typically in younger generations, it sometimes happens nowhere. Like nothing, like it's something that you just, I don't know, pick up along the way. But also, I think we have this tendency now, again, where if there is conflict, where parents want to protect their children, or make it go away. And I actually think like being in conflict and learning, getting some formal instruction on it, but also experiencing it and experiencing the discomfort is good and healthy. And you were mentioning earlier, Brendan, bowling alone, right? The whole idea of bowling alone in an earlier day when we're geographically kind of constrained, and we're involved in civic organizations, and we bump up against each other, and we learn about, I'm not that interested in the school district budget, but oh, I'm bowling and you have kids in school and I learn about it, and right, that happens less and less, partially because civic involvement is down, but also again because what I'm really interested in is like Star Trek: The Next Generation from these 2 years, and I can go to a Reddit group and connect with 15,000 other people who will nerd out on that with me. I don't need to talk to my neighbor. And so we need to really develop the skill of staying with difference and conflict from early ages, in my view.
I think that's exactly right. I'll get to the last question here in a second, but I'll do a little setup on to say, it just strikes me that a lot of these lessons are all around us. You read good literature, you read history. You look, you don't think Lincoln knew something about conflict resolution or about it's a little bit about, social courage, physical courage as well. If you read this history with these kind of thoughts in mind, you'll see, hey, you know what, that's how this character in this novel, that's how this historical figure solved this problem. And so it just seems like the lessons are all around us if we are open to hearing it and saying, hey, you know what, that person was didn't avoid conflict, they dove straight into it, or it washed over them, because that's the reality we live in. So the last question from the audience is that would the panelists recommend resources to turn to? And so and I love this question because it's I think if we're going to have this conversation, you're not going to learn it in kindergarten and be done. You're not going to learn it tonight and be done. You're going to engage in it tonight, and you're going to engage in it next week, and 2 months from now, and 6 months from now, and 10 years from now. Because if we ever stop having this conversation with each other, that's when we'll fall out. So what would you recommend that people turn to for resources to remain engaged and know more about courage, about conflict resilience, and all the pieces we talked about tonight? Bob, we'll start with you. What would you recommend to our
Sure.
to our folks of what is there a podcast? Are there certain books you would recommend, certain periodicals you'd recommend? Where can people turn to you to make sure that they are remaining and getting a good resource to dive a little deeper into this topic?
Yeah, so I'll say a few things. First, the National Institute for Civil Discourse, which both Courtney and I are affiliated with, offers a whole bunch of programming, occasional online events like this, resources on their website. So that's, one thing I would say. Secondly, there are lots of really great books out there. I think a book called Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most, offers a really helpful framework. And it's a very readable book that is good for both having a hard conversation around climate change or vaccines, but also a hard conversation on, how do you give feedback to somebody? And third is to the degree for people who are really interested, right? Is there either a program like the dinner program Leona is talking about that they could engage in, or an educational program? I teach courses through the Cambridge Negotiation Institute, but there's lots of programs out there that can give people a chance to both develop some skills, learn some frameworks, and do it in a lower risk environment. So those would be my thoughts.
Bob, I was going to say that as well, just to practice, the Peace Center here in Dallas, certainly the Holocaust Museum has many programs. The doing is really, of course, the research and the reading, and it's important, but also the practicing of it, to try it in a low risk way. Most communities have a Peace Center or a Holocaust Museum of some way to bring people together. That has been most effective for me and for my kids and folks in my family, is just to get in there and do it and practice.
Courtney?
I agree with all that. I have been really enjoying a particular book by this investigative journalist named Amanda Ripley, who really spent the last 5 years studying conflict. And it's called High Conflict. And she makes the important point, which I think you have all alluded to, is there can be good and healthy conflict. And she really studies, well, when does it become high conflict and destructive? And it's very readable. I'm listening to it, which is always fun. And then she also gives very practical suggestions for how to have these conversations better. Looping for understanding. She talks about the research and how, there's this illusion of communication when there's not. And she also talks about some other very, useful skills and things to avoid, like shame and humiliation and rejection, because, you're only going to make your opponent or the person you're talking to stronger and more defensive and aggressive by engaging in some of those things that, feel good in the moment, but are actually quite self-sabotaging in the long run.
All right. I think all that is great. I think, we've gone over time here a little bit, so we have to, I think, wrap this up, but I will take the moderator's prerogative here and add, echo Leona and everyone else here to say, I'd add the resources. Obviously, the Dallas Bar Association, which helped make this happen, has a lot of great material, a lot of opportunities to engage. So I would put them on high on the list. And the Dallas Holocaust Museum and Human Rights, of course, key piece to this tonight. And if you haven't gone through the facility downtown, when that becomes an option to do for you personally, make a point to do it, because there's a lot there and a lot more than people realize. I think, the exhibits that are there will remind you what happens when we don't find a way to work together and when the worst in humanity comes out, not just in World War II in Nazi Germany, but in other genocides that unfortunately happen too frequently in history. But also talks a lot about, there's a great material that talks a lot about American ideals and the work generally on human rights and how we can further that. So I think all those resources are right at your fingertips or available to you through the Dallas Holocaust Museum. So I do hope everyone here has the opportunity to avail themselves of that. And of course, Project Unity and other things like that are happening in your community. You'd be surprised to look around. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of ways to engage. So highly encourage everyone to do it. And certainly being here tonight, you're highly engaged. So I want to say thank you. I know it's an honor for me to be here tonight. And I know that all the panelists feel the same way. Annie, we'll turn it back to you here.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, the Dallas Bar Association, and Project Unity, we so appreciate you all being with us tonight, our panelists and Brendan, of course, everyone watching. I did want to give a quick plug. I know we've been talking about Together We Dine quite a bit tonight. There is an opportunity in November to attend a virtual community dine, November 17th at 5:30. I've just put the link in the chat to register. So again, Together We Dine, there's an introduction and the facilitators lead interactive small group discussions between participants on race relations, and current events. The event is free and open to the community. I think it's a great opportunity to practice a lot of what we've learned here tonight. To our panelists' point, you've got to get out there and practice it to keep that work going. So thank you again to Leona, Bob, Courtney, and Brendan for sharing your expertise with us tonight. To everyone watching, everyone have a great rest of your evening. See you next time.